My daughter declared me unfit for her elite Christmas celebration and sent me home to celebrate alone. But when her sophisticated in-laws turned on the news and saw what I had done, it shocked the city and destroyed their world. After that, she desperately tried to contact me. 91 missed calls. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The fabric of my gift bag stuck out like a torn dress when Catherine opened the door. Her smile froze for half a second before switching to that polished greeting I'd been hearing more often lately. "Dad, I'm glad to see you. How are things?" The words came out bright and sharp, like expensive crystal. I stepped into her marble foyer, my worn boots squeaking against the pristine floor. Everything here gleamed: the chandelier, the mirror frames, even the doorknobs looked like they cost more than my monthly pension. "Brought you some cookies." I pulled the tin from my bag. "Made them with that recipe your mother used to—" "Oh, wonderful. Come sit down." She gestured toward the living room without taking the tin. "I'll make tea." Her heels clicked across hardwood as I followed, taking in the massive windows, the leather furniture that probably cost more than my car. She disappeared into what I assume was the kitchen, leaving me alone with oil paintings I couldn't pronounce the names of. When she returned with a silver tray, I was still standing. "Please sit." She poured tea into cups so delicate I was afraid to touch them. "So, what brings you by?" I settled into a chair that felt like sitting on a cloud. "Honey, I thought maybe we could spend Christmas Eve together, like the old days." Her hand paused over the sugar bowl. "Christmas Eve? Remember when you were little? We'd make cocoa and watch those old movies until you fell asleep on the couch." I reached across to touch her hand, but she pulled it back to adjust her necklace. "That sounds nice, Dad. But actually—" She set down her cup with a tiny clink. "Silas and Martha are coming over. Jasper's parents, you know." I nodded. I'd met them at the wedding 2 years ago. Barely. "Dad, you understand? Silas and Martha are coming over. They're very intelligent, educated people. I don't think you're, well, ready for that level of conversation." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I stared at her, this woman who used to build blanket forts with me, who cried when I read her bedtime stories because she didn't want them to end. "Ready? Ready for what, Catherine?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. She shifted in her chair, not meeting my eyes. "Don't take it personally. Just different circles, different interests. You understand?" I understood perfectly. I understood that my daughter was ashamed of me. I understood that somehow, in this marble palace, the man who'd raised her alone after her mother died, who'd worked double shifts to pay for her college, who'd walked her down the aisle 2 years ago, that man wasn't good enough anymore. I stood up. My tea sat untouched on the expensive table. "I should go. Dad, don't be dramatic." But I was already moving toward the door, my gift bag in hand, the tin of cookies still sitting on her perfect coffee table, like an unwanted reminder of where she came from. The cold December air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I kept walking without looking back. The bus stop felt like a refuge after the suffocating perfection of that house. I sat on the cold metal bench, watching my breath form clouds in the December air, trying to make sense of what had just happened. When the newer 29 bus wheezed to a stop, I climbed aboard and found a seat near the back. The familiar smell of diesel and worn fabric felt more welcoming than all of Catherine's marble and crystal combined. Chicago rolled past the smudged windows, Lincoln Park's pristine brownstones giving way to neighborhoods that looked more like home. Every house seemed to have Christmas lights up, twinkling displays that should have brought joy but now felt like mockery. Red and green bulbs spelled out "Merry Christmas" in someone's front yard, and I wondered if their children would be embarrassed by such simple decorations. A woman across the aisle was arguing with someone on her phone about dinner plans. Normal people problems. Real problems. The bus lurched and swayed through traffic, and I found myself remembering other Christmas Eves. When Catherine was 8, she'd insisted on leaving cookies for Santa, even though we both knew I'd be the one eating them. She'd been so serious about it, arranging them just right on the good china, the only good china we had, inherited from her grandmother. "Daddy, you're the best in the world." She'd thrown her arms around my neck that night, her gap-toothed grin wider than the sky. When did that change? When did I become something to hide? The bus pulled into my neighborhood, and I walked the 3 blocks to my house slowly, in no hurry to face the silence waiting there. My key turned in the lock with a familiar click, and I stepped into the small living room that suddenly felt even smaller than usual. My chair, the brown recliner I'd bought used 15 years ago, welcomed me like an old friend. The fabric was worn thin on the armrests where my hands always rested, but it held me just right. I sank into it and closed my eyes. But I couldn't stop thinking about her graduation from Northwestern, how proud I'd been, wearing my one good suit that was still too big for me. When I'd tried to approach her afterward, surrounded by her classmates in their expensive clothes, she'd given me that same smile, the one I'd seen today. "Dad, maybe you shouldn't come up to me in front of my classmates." I'd told myself then that she was just excited, overwhelmed by the day. College kids were different, more sophisticated. I'd waited by the car instead, watching her laugh with people who looked like they'd never worried about rent money or whether the heat would stay on all winter. Now I understood. I'd been an embarrassment even then. The room grew darker as afternoon faded to evening, but I didn't turn on the lights. I reached for the drawer in the side table, the one where I kept the important papers, insurance documents, my will, and underneath everything else, the small wooden box I'd inherited from my father. Inside were photographs. Catherine as a baby, her mother holding her in the hospital. Catherine's first day of school, missing her 2 front teeth. Her high school prom, radiant in a dress we'd saved for months to buy. And her wedding day. I pulled out that photo and studied it in the dim light filtering through my windows. There she was in white silk that cost more than I made in 6 months, standing next to Jasper in his perfect tuxedo. I was in the background, barely visible, wearing that same old suit from her graduation. Even in the photo, the distance between us was obvious. I held the picture closer, and for the first time, I noticed something I'd missed before. She wasn't looking at me at all. That wedding photo told a story I'd been too blind to see. Catherine stood with her new husband's family, Silas and Martha Kennedy flanking them like expensive bookends. Everyone in designer clothes, everyone belonging to the same world of privilege I'd never understand. And there I was, pushed to the edge of the frame like an afterthought. I remembered that day differently now, how Jasper had barely acknowledged me during the reception, how Martha Kennedy had asked what I did for a living with that particular tone that meant she already knew I wasn't worth knowing. "Jasper, this is my dad," Catherine had said, the introduction quick and dismissive. "Oh yes, of course." His handshake had been limp, his eyes already moving past me to more important guests. I'd chalked it up to wedding stress then, new in-laws to impress, social pressures I didn't understand. But sitting here now, surrounded by 20 years of photographs chronicling my daughter's slow drift away from me, the pattern was crystal clear. The wealthy Kennedys hadn't just gained a daughter-in-law, they'd erased a father. I set the wedding photo aside and reached deeper into the box, pulling out something I'd hidden even from myself for the past month. The envelope was still crisp, the return address from the Illinois State Lottery clearly visible. $1 million. I'd bought the ticket on a whim back in October, the way I did sometimes when the jackpot got big enough to dream about. Checked the numbers a week later while drinking my morning coffee, nearly choked when I realized what I was looking at. $1 million. But I hadn't told anyone. Not my neighbors, not my few remaining friends, and especially not Catherine. Something had held me back, some instinct I couldn't name at the time. Now I knew why. My fingers traced the edges of the ticket as darkness settled over my small house. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled in windows where families were probably planning their holiday celebrations. Normal families where children didn't outgrow their parents like old clothes. I thought about Margaret, my wife, who died when Catherine was only 12. Margaret would have known what to do. She'd had a way of seeing people's hearts, understanding their motivations in a way that always escaped me. "Hiram, promise me you'll always love our little girl," she'd whispered in those final days in the hospital. "No matter what happens, no matter how she changes, remember that she's ours." I'd kept that promise for 20 years, through teenage rebellion and college snobbery, and now this final crushing rejection. But love didn't mean accepting cruelty. Margaret would have understood that too. The lottery ticket felt warm in my hands, like it was alive with possibility. $1 million, enough to change everything, to level the playing field in ways Catherine could never expect. She thought I wasn't good enough for her sophisticated world, That I lacked the intelligence and education to hold a conversation with the almighty Kennedy family? We'd see about that. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting in the dark for so long. The photograph of Catherine's wedding lay on the side table where I had left it, but I didn't look at it again. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and turned on the light, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness. The phone book was in the junk drawer where it had been for years. I flipped through the yellow pages until I found what I was looking for. Attorneys. Specifically, estate planning attorneys. Tomorrow was Sunday, but Monday I'd make some calls. It was time to teach my daughter a lesson about what really mattered in life. Time to show her that the father she was so ashamed of had more power than she could possibly imagine. The lottery ticket crinkled slightly as I folded it and slipped it into my wallet. Christmas was still 9 days away. Plenty of time to plan the perfect gift. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, but I dressed with more care than I had in months. The decision had crystallized overnight like ice on my bedroom window. If I was going to pull this off, I needed help from someone I could trust. Miller's Corner Cafe sat on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where working folks could still afford coffee without feeling guilty. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table by the window where I could watch for Waldo while keeping our conversation private. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what I needed to steady my nerves. I'd called Waldo the night before, kept it simple. Meet me for coffee tomorrow. I have something that might interest you professionally. He'd agreed immediately. That was Waldo. Always curious, always ready for a story. I spotted him hurrying down the sidewalk at exactly 10 o'clock, briefcase in one hand, phone pressed to his ear with the other. Still the same Waldo I'd known for 20 years, though his hair had gone completely gray and he wore the kind of suit that meant television work paid better than factory wages. He pushed through the door, scanning the room until he found me. His face broke into the genuine smile I remembered from our days on the assembly line. "Waldo, old friend, how are things at the station?" "Hiram!" He dropped into the chair across from me, setting his briefcase on the floor. "You look different today somehow. What's happened?" Sharp as ever. I'd forgotten how journalists could read people, pick up on changes others might miss. But I wasn't ready to show my cards yet. "I have a story for a Christmas broadcast, something that will move people to tears." His eyes lit up immediately, professional instinct kicking in. "Let's hear the details. You know I love good stories." I leaned back, allowing myself a small smile. No, this will be a surprise even for you. Trust me." Waldo studied my face, trying to read between the lines. After 30 seconds of silence, he laughed and shook his head. "You always were stubborn. Fine, keep your secrets for now. But I need something to work with. What kind of story? Human interest? Local news?" "Christmas miracle," I said simply. "The kind that reminds people what the holiday is really about." He pulled out his phone and opened the calendar app. "When do you want to do this? We're pretty booked through Christmas Eve, but I could squeeze you in. December 23rd, 2 o'clock. The certainty in my voice seemed to surprise him. He looked up from his phone. "That's specific. You sure about the timing?" "Positive." He tapped the date into his calendar. "Okay, December 23rd. It is. Should I book Studio B? How long do you think you'll need?" I pulled a small notebook from my pocket, the same one I'd used to track my factory shifts for 40 years, and wrote down the details as we discussed them. Studio setup, technical requirements, broadcast timing, all the pieces falling into place. "Will this be live or recorded?" Waldo asked. "Live would be better, more authentic." He nodded, making notes of his own. "We can do that. 2 o'clock works perfectly for our evening broadcast. But Hiram..." He leaned forward, dropping his voice. "You're being awfully mysterious about this. Can you give me any hint what we're dealing with?" I closed my notebook and slipped it back into my pocket. "Remember when we used to talk about what we'd do if we won the lottery? How we'd spend the money?" "Sure. You always said you'd help kids who didn't have families." "Did I?" I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table. "See you next Sunday, old friend. And Waldo, make sure the cameras are ready. This is going to be the story of your career." I walked out before he could ask any more questions, but I could feel his eyes following me through the window as I headed down the street. 1 week to get everything else in place. Time to go shopping. The Nordstrom downtown looked like a palace compared to any store I'd ever shopped in. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and salespeople who looked like they belonged in magazines. I almost turned around twice before forcing myself through the revolving door. A young man in an expensive suit approached me immediately. His smile was polite but cautious. He'd sized me up in seconds and wasn't expecting a big sale. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you find something?" "I need a suit. Something good. Navy blue." He led me through racks of clothing that cost more than I used to make in a month. When I pointed to a wool suit with a price tag that made my pension check look like pocket change, his eyebrows went up. "Sir, this is a very expensive suit. Are you certain?" I looked at him directly. "Young man, sometimes you need to look like $1,000,000. The fitting process took an hour. Measurements, adjustments, fabric choices. I stood in front of a three-way mirror while he pinned and tucked, transforming me into someone I barely recognized. The man looking back at me stood straighter, looked confident, commanded respect. "We can have the alterations done by Thursday," he said. "Perfect." Tuesday, I found a barber shop that still knew how to give a proper cut and shave. The old Italian who ran it didn't ask questions, just worked with careful precision. When he was finished, I looked 20 years younger. Wednesday and Thursday, I stayed home and practiced, stood in front of my bathroom mirror and rehearsed what I would say on camera, how to hold myself, where to look, how to speak clearly. "Yes, Hiram, you'll tell them the truth about real values." I printed information about 3 Chicago orphanages from the computer at the library, studying their needs, their Christmas wish lists. Children without families, just like I'd told Waldo. I cared about all those years ago, on the factory floor. Friday morning, I called each orphanage. "Good morning, I'd like to learn about your Christmas needs." The first call was to St. Catherine's home on the south side. The director, Mrs. Rodriguez, sounded tired but hopeful when she heard I might be able to help. "We have 43 children right now. Most won't have any presents under the tree unless we provide them." "What would help the most?" "Everything, new clothes, shoes, books, toys. But honestly, sir, just knowing someone cares means more than any gift." The second call was to Lincoln House, specializing in older children who'd aged out of most adoption programs. The third was New Hope Center, focusing on sibling groups who needed to stay together. By Saturday, I had my list. 43 children at St. Catherine's, 21 teenagers at Lincoln House, 32 kids in sibling groups at New Hope, 96 children total, children who'd been thrown away by people who were supposed to love them, children who understood what it felt like to not be good enough. Saturday evening, I picked up my altered suit. The young salesman barely recognized me when I walked in. "Mr. Dixon, you look incredible." Sunday night, I laid the navy suit out on my bed next to a crisp white shirt and the one good tie I'd owned for 15 years. Tomorrow, the whole city would know that Hiram Dixon, the man his daughter was too embarrassed to introduce to her in-laws, had more to offer than anyone had imagined. I sat in my worn recliner one last time, as my old self, and pulled out the lottery ticket. $1 million. Tomorrow, it would all belong to children who needed it more than I ever could. Margaret would have been proud. Monday morning, I got dressed slowly, savoring each piece of my transformation. The suit fit perfectly. The shirt was crisp. The tie was straight. In my hallway mirror, a successful businessman looked back at me. The bus ride downtown felt different when you looked like you belonged in the front seats. Other passengers glanced at me with the kind of respect I hadn't seen in years. The WCHI 7 building rose 30 stories into the gray December sky. I checked my watch. 1:45 p.m. Perfect timing for a 2 o'clock appointment that would change everything. The lobby of WCHI 7 gleamed with polished brass and marble, news monitors displaying the afternoon headlines on every wall. I approached the security desk with my shoulders back and my chin up, the posture of a man who belonged here. "Hiram Dixon to see Waldo Warren." The guard checked his computer and handed me a visitor badge. 23rd floor, Mr. Dixon. Elevator bank to your right." The elevator ride gave me a moment to collect my thoughts. In less than an hour, everything would be out in the open. No more secrets, no more pretending to be less than I was. Waldo met me at the elevator doors, and his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "Hiram, you look absolutely stunning. Ready to tell your story?" "Ready as I'll ever be, old friend." He led me through a maze of cubicles and editing rooms where people in headsets spoke into microphones and stared at walls of monitors. The energy was infectious, controlled chaos that somehow produced the evening news. "Studio B is set up for us," Waldo said as we walked. I've got my best camera operator, and the lighting crew worked magic this morning. You're gonna look like a movie star." We entered a room that was smaller than I'd expected, but packed with professional equipment. Cameras on wheels, lights on tall stands, cables snaking across the floor. 2 chairs faced each other across a small table, with the WCHI 7 logo prominently displayed on the wall behind them. "Mr. Dixon?" A woman with a clipboard approached. "I'm Sarah, the producer. We'll get you set up with a microphone and do a quick sound check." She clipped a tiny microphone to my suit lapel with practiced efficiency, then had me count to 10 while someone behind the cameras adjusted levels. "Perfect. Natural speaking voice. No need to project." Waldo settled into his chair across from me, transforming before my eyes into the television professional I'd watched on the evening news. His posture straightened, his voice became more measured, his smile took on that practiced sincerity that works so well on camera. "We'll start with some easy questions to get you comfortable," he said quietly. "Then you can tell me about this mysterious Christmas story." Behind the cameras, Sarah held up her hand and counted down silently. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A red light appeared on the camera facing us. "Good afternoon. I'm Waldo Warren with a special Christmas story that I guarantee will touch your heart." His voice carried the smooth authority of 20 years in television. "With me today is my longtime friend Hiram Dixon, who has something remarkable to share with our viewers." He turned to me with that professional smile that somehow managed to feel genuine. "Mr. Dixon, please tell our viewers about your special Christmas plan." This was it, the moment I'd been rehearsing for a week. I looked directly into the camera lens, knowing that somewhere in Lincoln Park, my daughter might be watching. "Waldo, a month ago, something incredible happened to me." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Behind the camera, I could see Sarah leaning forward, sensing that something big was coming. Something that reminded me what Christmas is really supposed to be about. I took a breath and looked directly into the camera lens, seeing my reflection in the dark glass. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were watching, including a daughter who thought her father wasn't worth knowing. "A month ago, I won $1 million in the Illinois Mega Millions lottery." The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind the camera, Sarah's clipboard dropped to her side. Waldo's professional composure cracked for just a moment before his journalist training kicked back in. "My goodness, $1 million, and you didn't tell anyone?" "Not a soul." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the lottery ticket, holding it up to the camera. The numbers were clearly visible, along with the validation stamp. $1 million, after taxes, about $600,000. Waldo leaned forward in his chair, his eyes wide with genuine amazement. "Hiram, this is incredible. What did you do when you realized you'd won?" "I hid it." The confession felt liberating after weeks of secrecy. Stuck it in a box with my important papers and tried to figure out what it meant. A factory worker's pension doesn't prepare you for that kind of money. "But you must have been excited." "Scared," I interrupted. "Money changes people, Waldo. Changes how they see you, how they treat you. I've seen it happen." I pulled the prepared documents from my other pocket, legal papers I'd had drawn up over the past week. The camera operator moved in for a close-up as I spread them on the small table between us. I decided to give all the money to children who don't have parental love this Christmas. The studio fell completely silent except for the hum of equipment. Even the technical crew had stopped what they were doing to listen. 3 Chicago orphanages, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. St. Catherine's Home, Lincoln House, and New Hope Center. 96 children total who'll wake up Christmas morning knowing someone cares about them. Waldo's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's extraordinary, Hiram. But why? Why give it all away?" This was the moment I'd rehearsed 100 times in my bathroom mirror. The moment that would reach every living room in Chicago, including one particular mansion in Lincoln Park. Happiness isn't about money, friends. It's about loving and being loved. I thought of Margaret, of the promises I'd made at her bedside, of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap during Christmas movies. Some children grow up without hugs. They go to bed every night wondering if anyone in the world cares whether they exist. And some parents, my voice caught slightly. Some parents don't value what they have. They forget that love isn't something you earn by being successful or impressive. It's something you give freely, or not at all. The camera zoomed in on my face as I continued. Those children at St. Catherine's, at Lincoln House, at New Hope Center, they'll get presents this Christmas. But more than that, they'll know that somewhere in this city, an old man thinks they're worth $1 million. They'll know they matter. Waldo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his professional facade completely abandoned. This is the most beautiful Christmas story I've ever heard. Your daughter must be so proud. My daughter, I said carefully, will learn what I hope every parent learns, that the greatest treasure isn't what we accumulate, but what we give away, not the respect we demand, but the love we freely share. I folded the documents and placed them back in my pocket. The lottery ticket went back into my wallet, where it had lived for nearly 2 months. The money will be transferred tomorrow, Christmas Eve. By Christmas morning, those children will have everything they need for the holiday, and I'll have exactly what I've always had, the knowledge that I did right by someone who needed it. Waldo reached across the table and shook my hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Hiram Dixon, a true Christmas miracle. The red light on the camera went dark. The interview was over. The taxi ride home felt like floating. I sat in the back seat watching Chicago's neighborhoods roll past the window, each one decorated for Christmas, each one now part of a city that knew Hiram Dixon's name. That your first time on TV? The driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. First, and probably last. You look familiar, though. Didn't I just see you somewhere? I smiled but said nothing. In 2 hours, he'd know exactly where he'd seen me. Back in my house, I hung the expensive navy suit in my closet with the same care I'd taken putting it on. The transformation was complete. I was Hiram Dixon again, not the polished stranger who'd sat across from Waldo under those bright lights. I changed into my regular clothes, worn jeans, a flannel shirt that had seen 20 winters, house slippers that Margaret had bought me before she died. These were the clothes of a man worth exactly 1 pension check per month. In the kitchen, I heated a can of tomato soup and sliced 2 pieces of bread from the loaf I'd bought 3 days ago. Simple food for a simple man who'd just given away more money than most people see in a lifetime. My phone buzzed on the counter, text message from Waldo. Best interview of my career. Thank you, friend. I typed back, thank you for believing in an old man's story. Then I turned the phone to silent and placed it face down. In 2 hours, Catherine would learn who her father really is. In 2 hours, she'd understand that the man she was too embarrassed to introduce to her intellectual in-laws had just made the biggest charitable donation in the city's recent history. I carried my soup and bread to my worn recliner and sat down with a view of the television. The 6 o'clock news would lead with my story. Waldo had told me as much before I left the studio. Christmas miracle stories always get top billing, he'd said. On my side table sat a framed photograph of Margaret holding baby Catherine in the hospital. Both of them smiling, both of them trusting me to take care of them forever. I'd kept half that promise. Margaret, forgive me for this lesson to our daughter, I whispered to the photograph. But she needs to remember what you taught her about kindness. The minutes crawled by. I ate my soup slowly, savoring the quiet before the storm. After tonight, my phone would ring constantly. Reporters, charity organizations, probably some people wanting money. The peaceful anonymity I'd lived with for 68 years was about to end. But it was worth it. Every second of preparation, every dollar of that million, every moment of anticipation, worth it to teach one spoiled daughter that her father was worth more than she'd ever imagined. At 5:45, I picked up the television remote and held it in my lap. 15 more minutes until the broadcast that would change everything. 15 minutes until Catherine discovered that the man she'd rejected 8 days ago was front-page news. I thought about her sitting in that marble living room with Jasper and his parents, all of them watching the evening news together. The shock on their faces when they realized the generous philanthropist on their screen was the uneducated factory worker they'd deemed unfit for sophisticated company. The clock on my cable box showed 5:59. Time to watch myself become famous. I pressed the power button, and WCHI 7's evening news theme music filled my living room. Across the city, thousands of families were settling in for their pre-Christmas news, expecting the usual mix of politics and weather. Good evening, I'm Sandra Martinez, with a special Christmas story that will restore your faith in human kindness, the anchor announced. Tonight, we meet a Chicago man whose incredible generosity reminds us what the holiday season is truly about: cut to Waldo's face, professional and warm. His name is Hiram Dixon. He's 68 years old, a retired factory worker living quietly in Englewood. But a month ago, his quiet life changed forever. Then there I was on television, sitting in that studio chair, looking like a successful businessman in my tailored suit. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. 20 miles north in Lincoln Park, the Kennedy family had gathered for their usual evening news ritual. Catherine sat beside Jasper on their Italian leather sofa, while his parents occupied matching armchairs that cost more than most people's cars. "Change the channel," Martha Kennedy said dismissively. "I hate these heartwarming stories. So manipulative." But Jasper had the remote, and something about the man on screen caught his attention. "Wait, that guy looks familiar." On screen, my television self began to speak. "A month ago, I won $1 million in the Illinois Mega Millions lottery." "Oh, please," Silas Kennedy muttered. "Another lottery winner's story." Catherine glanced up from her phone, mildly curious about the well-dressed man discussing his windfall. There was something about his voice, something that tugged at a memory she couldn't quite place. Back in my living room, I watched myself pull out the lottery ticket, saw the camera zoom in on the winning numbers. This was the moment I dreamed about for 8 days, the moment my daughter would realize she'd underestimated her father. "I decided to give all the money to children who don't have parental love this Christmas," my television voice declared. In Lincoln Park, the Kennedy family was paying attention now. $1 million giveaway was newsworthy, even to people who considered themselves above such things. 3 Chicago orphanages, I continued on screen, St. Catherine's Home, Lincoln House, and New Hope Center. 96 children total. Catherine's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the marble coffee table. The man on television, the generous philanthropist in the expensive suit, had just turned slightly toward the camera, and she saw his profile clearly for the first time. "That's," she whispered. "Some children grow up without hugs," my television self was saying, eyes bright with emotion. "They go to bed every night wondering if anyone in the world cares whether they exist. And some parents don't value what they have." The color drained from Catherine's face. She knew that voice now, knew those eyes, knew the way the man's mouth moved when he spoke about children needing love. "Jasper," she breathed. "That's my father." "What?" Jasper grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. "That man on television, that's my dad. That's Hiram Dixon." The Kennedy family stared at the screen in stunned silence as I continued my interview, explaining my philosophy about love and money, about parents who forget what matters most. "Your father?" Martha Kennedy's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Your father is giving away $1 million? The greatest treasure isn't what we accumulate," my television voice continued, "but what we give away. Not the respect we demand, but the love we freely share." Silas Kennedy leaned forward in his chair. "That's the man you said wasn't sophisticated enough for our Christmas Eve dinner?" Catherine couldn't speak. She could only stare at the screen as her father, her supposedly simple, unsophisticated father, delivered the most eloquent speech about generosity and love she'd ever heard. Across the city, in diners and apartments, in suburban homes and downtown condos, Chicago was falling in love with Hiram Dixon. Parents hugged their children a little tighter. Couples reached for each other's hands. The story of an old man's incredible gift was touching hearts throughout the metropolitan area. But in one mansion in Lincoln Park, the story was doing something different entirely. It was destroying the careful world of superiority and snobbery that Catherine had built around herself. On television, the interview was ending. Waldo shook my hand as the camera pulled back to show both of us, 2 old friends sharing a moment of genuine emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, Hiram Dixon, a true Christmas miracle." The broadcast cut to commercial, but the Kennedy living room remained frozen in silence. Finally, Jasper found his voice. "Your father just gave away $1 million on live television." Catherine reached for her phone with shaking hands. The television screen faded to a commercial for luxury cars, an ironic transition that nobody in the Kennedy living room could appreciate at that moment. Silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the tick of their expensive grandfather clock. Catherine stared at the blank screen, her face pale as winter marble. The well-dressed philanthropist they'd just watched was her father, her simple, unsophisticated father who wasn't ready for intelligent conversation. This can't be true. My father is a millionaire." Her voice cracked on the last word. Jasper shot up from the sofa, his composure finally shattering. "Your father just gave away our money. This is insanity." He paced across their imported Italian marble floor, his designer shoes clicking with each agitated step. The sound echoed off their cathedral ceiling like gunshots. "Our money?" Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "It was never our money." Silas Kennedy rose from his leather armchair with the deliberate movements of a predator, his cold eyes fixed on his daughter-in-law. "Catherine, why didn't you know about the lottery win?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Martha Kennedy sat frozen in her chair, crystal water glass trembling in her manicured hands. We don't talk about." Catherine fumbled for words that wouldn't come. Then the realization hit her like a physical blow. She remembered the conversation 8 days ago, remembered dismissing her father as unfit for their Christmas Eve gathering. The timing wasn't coincidental. "He deliberately didn't tell me. This is revenge for yesterday." She lunged for her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed her father's number. It went straight to voicemail, the generic recording, not even his voice. "Dad, pick up the phone, please." She tried again. Voicemail, again, voicemail. Jasper stopped pacing and turned on her with fury she'd never seen before. "How could you not know your own father won the lottery? What kind of daughter are you?" "The kind who gets embarrassed by her blue-collar father," Martha Kennedy said quietly, setting down her water glass. "The kind who forgets where she came from." Catherine tried calling again, then sent a text with trembling fingers. "Dad, you're an old fool. That money could have changed our lives." The message delivered, but no response came. Silas walked to the massive windows overlooking Lincoln Park, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice carried the chill of winter wind. $600,000 after taxes, gone to strangers when it could have secured our family's future. "My grandchildren's inheritance," Martha whispered, "given away to orphans." Catherine called again, and again. Each ring that went unanswered felt like another door slamming shut on the life they could have had. Meanwhile, 25 miles south in Englewood, I sat in my comfortable recliner with a cup of tea, watching my phone light up on the kitchen table. The screen showed Catherine, 17 missed calls. I took a sip of tea and smiled. The woman who had declared me unfit for sophisticated company was learning that sophistication and intelligence weren't measured by bank accounts or social standing. They were measured by wisdom, compassion, and the ability to recognize what truly mattered in life. My phone buzzed again. Message notification. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Desperation, anger, disbelief. All the emotions she should have felt 8 days ago when she'd broken her father's heart. Outside my window, Christmas lights twinkled in modest homes throughout my neighborhood. Families were gathering for the holiday, parents hugging children, grandparents telling stories. Real wealth on display in every kitchen, every living room, every front porch decorated with love instead of money. Catherine could call all night if she wanted. She'd taught me a valuable lesson about being ready for important conversations. Now it was her turn to wait. By 9:30 that evening, my phone showed 91 missed calls. I'd stopped counting after the 50th, but the device kept a faithful tally of my daughter's growing desperation. The Chicago media had embraced my story with enthusiasm that surprised even me. Radio hosts discussed the Christmas millionaire between songs. Social media buzzed with praise for the humble factory worker who gave it all away. Local news ran follow-up segments with quotes from the orphanages I'd selected. "True Christmas spirit from a simple man with a big heart," one radio commentator said during the 8 o'clock news roundup. My phone lit up again. This time it was Jasper calling from Catherine's phone. I let it ring through to voicemail, then played the message. "Mr. Dixon, this is unreasonable. Think about your grandchildren's future." Grandchildren. The man who barely acknowledged my existence at his wedding was now claiming family connections he'd previously ignored. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up outside my house. Through my front window, I watched Catherine get out of her Mercedes, slam the door, and march up my walkway in heels that clicked against the December pavement like castanets. She knocked. Politely at first. Dad, I know you're in there. We need to talk." I continued drinking my tea. The radiator hummed. The Christmas lights outside painted soft colors on my living room wall. The knocking became pounding. "Dad, open this door right now. This is ridiculous." I could hear her voice break, frustration mixing with something that might have been desperation or fear. The difference hardly mattered now. She tried the door handle. Locked, of course. I'd learned something about security living in Inglewood that her Lincoln Park mansion had never taught her. "I know you can hear me. This is cruel. We're family." Family. 8 days ago, I wasn't sophisticated enough for her family Christmas gathering. Tonight, with $1 million in play, we were suddenly family again. Her pounding grew weaker, then stopped entirely. Through the window, I watched her lean against my front door, shoulders shaking. She might have been crying, but I couldn't tell from inside. After 10 more minutes, she walked back to her car and drove away. By 10 o'clock, the story had reached Chicago's late-night talk radio shows. Callers phoned in to share their own stories of Christmas generosity, inspired by what they'd seen on the news. "That old man reminded me what the holiday is really about," one caller said. "I'm going to volunteer at a soup kitchen tomorrow instead of just writing a check." Another, "I called my father tonight. Haven't talked to him in 2 years over some stupid argument. This Hiram Dixon guy, he made me realize what matters." 91 calls. I wondered how many there would be if I were still poor. The answer came to me as I prepared for bed. 0. If I were still poor, if I hadn't won that lottery ticket, if I were still just a factory worker on a pension living in Englewood, my phone would be silent. My daughter would be preparing for her sophisticated Christmas Eve with her educated in-laws, never giving her embarrassing father a second thought. But I wasn't poor anymore. More importantly, I wasn't powerless. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. I had 3 orphanages to visit, 96 children to meet, and a city full of people who now knew that Hiram Dixon was somebody worth knowing. My phone lit up one final time. Call number 92. I turned it face down on the nightstand and smiled. Christmas Eve morning arrived crisp and bright, the kind of winter day that made Chicago look like a postcard. I woke at 6, refreshed in a way I hadn't felt in months. My phone showed 17 new missed calls from overnight, but they seemed as distant as yesterday's weather. I made coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs, a feast compared to my usual breakfast. Today deserved celebration. At 8 o'clock, I dressed in my regular clothes, clean jeans, a warm sweater Margaret had knitted years ago, and my comfortable winter coat. The expensive suit would stay in the closet. Today I wanted to be myself, not the television personality I'd created for my revenge. The first stop was New Hope Center on the south side. I'd arranged to visit all 3 orphanages this morning, wanting to see where my money was going to work. When I arrived, television crews were already waiting. Word had spread through the media that Chicago's Christmas philanthropist would be making personal visits to the beneficiaries of his donation. "Mr. Dixon, Channel 7 News." A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "How does it feel to know you've changed 96 young lives?" "It feels like Christmas," I said simply. Inside New Hope, 32 children, ages 4 to 16, had gathered in their main room. Presents wrapped in bright paper filled every surface, gifts that my lottery ticket had made possible. "Uncle Hiram, thank you for the bicycle. You're like Santa Claus." A 7-year-old boy threw his arms around my waist with the fierce affection that only children can give. His name was Marcus. No parents, no family outside these walls, but his smile could have powered the city's Christmas lights. He'd been here 3 years, the director told me. Multiple families had considered adopting him, but something always fell through. "Mr. Dixon, you've given these children the best Christmas of their lives," the director said, tears in her eyes. "They've never had presents like this, never had someone care enough to make sure they felt special." I watched Marcus ride his new bicycle in circles around the room, other children cheering and taking turns. His joy was pure, uncomplicated by greed or expectation. He wasn't thinking about what the bike cost or whether he deserved it. He was just happy. When the news cameras captured me for a final interview, I kept my words simple. I just wanted these children to feel loved. That's the greatest gift anyone can receive. The second orphanage, St. Catherine's, was smaller but no less grateful. 43 children had new clothes, toys, books, and most importantly, the knowledge that someone in Chicago thought they were worth $1 million. At Lincoln House, 21 teenagers gathered around me with a maturity born from hard experience. These were kids who'd aged out of most people's adoption dreams. Too old for cute family photos, but not old enough to survive alone. You didn't have to do this, 16-year-old Sarah said. Most people forget about us. I'll never forget any of you, I promised. Driving home through Chicago's decorated streets, I felt a contentment I hadn't known in 20 years. Not since Margaret died had I experienced such complete satisfaction with my choices. This was real happiness, not gold, but golden hearts. Not the respect I demanded from my daughter, but the gratitude freely given by children who understood the value of love. My phone had been silent all morning, 91 calls yesterday, 0 today. Perhaps Catherine was finally learning the same lesson I'd learned 8 days ago in her marble foyer, that some conversations aren't worth having until both people are ready. Or perhaps she was simply exhausted from trying to reach a father who'd spent his whole life being available, only to discover that availability was a privilege, not a right. Either way, I had what I'd always wanted. Not my daughter's respect. That would have to be earned honestly, not bought with lottery winnings. But something better. The knowledge that my life mattered to someone. 96 someones, to be exact. And that was worth more than any $1 million ever could be. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.